No one expected fireworks when Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the HBO studio stage that night. The format was familiar. Bill Maher stood center stage in his signature blue suit, sharp-witted and confident as ever, ready to challenge his guest with biting remarks. The cameras rolled, the lights blazed, and the progressive-leaning crowd settled in, anticipating another round of Maher's trademark satire. "Please welcome White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt," the announcer declared. Polite applause followed as she walked on stage with quiet confidence. Dressed in a crisp navy blazer and white blouse, her demeanor calm and composed, she was entering a space where few expected her to shine. "Thanks for joining us," Maher said, reclining casually. "I know it's been a long week defending the indefensible." The audience chuckled on cue. But Leavitt didn't flinch. She smiled politely, took her seat, and calmly opened a sleek leather portfolio. "Actually, Bill," she said, "before we begin, I want to address something you said during your rally with Bondi last weekend." Maher raised an eyebrow. The smirk returned. "Oh, you want to talk about that?" "Good, because," he never finished. What Leavitt pulled out next, a piece of documented evidence no one saw coming, brought the entire studio to a standstill. The audience fell silent. Maher, for once, had nothing to say. What followed was more than a clash of opinions. It was a moment that may reshape how political discourse plays out on live television. If you're witnessing this explosive exchange for the first time, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll be breaking down how this unexpected showdown could transform the future of political talk shows. For months, Bill Maher had carefully crafted a public image as a centrist, a rare voice in media who claimed to challenge both sides of the political spectrum with equal scrutiny. On Real Time, he often emphasized his neutrality, stating that his only allegiance was to truth and honest debate. This positioning earned him praise from moderates who saw him as one of the few willing to call out extremism, regardless of party. But last weekend, Maher made headlines for something else entirely. He appeared at a public rally alongside former Attorney General Bondi. There, he delivered what was widely framed by the media as a bold, nonpartisan critique of the current administration. Coverage praised him for speaking truth to power, reinforcing his centrist reputation. Watching closely, however, was Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history at just 27. Dismissed by critics as a Gen Z mouthpiece, Leavitt had quietly built a reputation inside Washington for her razor-sharp command of messaging and her uncanny ability to detect media hypocrisy. She had come to Real Time prepared, not just for a debate, but for a reckoning. As the audience settled in, expecting Maher to intellectually corner another young conservative, Leavitt calmly flipped the script. "You've built your brand lately on being politically neutral," she began, voice steady. "Someone who critiques both sides equally, with no allegiance to any party." She placed a slim folder on the table between them. "But that image isn't entirely accurate, is it, Bill?" Maher leaned in, trying to maintain his cool. "I call it like I see it. Sometimes that means going after the left. Sometimes the right." Leavitt didn't blink. "At the Bondi rally, you said, and I quote, 'I'm just a comedian looking for the truth, not pushing anyone's agenda.' That's your public stance, correct?" "Yes," Maher replied, the tension now palpable. "So, what's your point?" Leavitt opened the folder slowly. "My point is that your private communications tell a different story." A hush fell over the studio. Maher's producer appeared in the wings, visibly concerned. The control room signaled for a possible commercial break. But Maher, recognizing that cutting away now would raise even more suspicion, waved them off. "Go on," he said. Leavitt pulled out the first document, a printed email with highlighted text. "This was sent from your personal account to Bondi, 3 weeks before the rally. In it, you wrote, 'We need to coordinate our messaging to maximize impact against the administration. My team will work with yours on specific talking points.'" The audience shifted uncomfortably. The words didn't match the persona Maher had cultivated. This wasn't a debate anymore, it was an exposé. Leavitt, with calm precision, continued unveiling more documents as producers stood frozen. For once, the studio wasn't laughing. Bill Maher glanced down at the document Karoline Leavitt had just placed in front of him. His jaw tightened. "Context matters," he said curtly. That was about aligning on facts, not politics. Leavitt didn't miss a beat. "Then let's look at more context." She calmly pulled out another sheet of paper. "This is a text exchange between you and Ms. Bondi, 2 days before the rally." She slid it next to the first. "Here you write, 'The key is maintaining my public neutrality while helping push the narrative.' My audience trusts me precisely because they think I'm not on a team. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone in the audience audibly gasped. Maher's expression darkened. "Where did you get these?" he asked, voice low but still caught by the mic. "That's not the question you should be asking," Leavitt replied evenly. "The real question is, are they authentic?" Maher looked at the papers, then back at her. For a moment, perhaps the first in his long career, he seemed genuinely speechless. "These are private communications taken out of context," he finally said, regaining some of his composure. "And possibly obtained illegally." "They weren't," Leavitt said calmly. "And there's no context missing. I have the full exchanges right here." She tapped the folder again. "Including your detailed strategy to maintain a facade of neutrality while privately working against the administration." Maher's eyes narrowed. "This is a hit job. You've brought selectively edited material to mislead my audience." "Nothing here is edited," Leavitt countered. "But let's move to something even harder to spin, video." She nodded to someone offstage. The screen behind them lit up. Security footage appeared, time-stamped 3 days before the rally. Maher was seen in a private meeting room with Bondi and several staffers. His voice was clear. "I'm playing the both sides card publicly because that's how I maintain credibility with my audience. But between us, we know which side needs to win in November." Gasps echoed through the audience. Maher's eyes locked on the screen. "Turn that off," he barked, glancing toward his production team. No one moved. Leavitt allowed the video to run for 10 more seconds, then calmly gestured to stop. "There's more," she said, "but I think that made the point." In the control room, producers scrambled in hushed panic. This was live. They couldn't cut. They couldn't edit. And stopping now would only fuel the fire. What began as a typical interview had turned into a televised reckoning. Maher inhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. "You've brought these clips without warning or a chance for me to respond," he said. "That's not fair journalism." "With respect, Bill," Leavitt said, unwavering, "I'm not a journalist. I'm the White House press secretary. I'm responding directly to your public claim of neutrality. And I'm happy to release the full-text chains and unedited video for everyone to see." The audience, once firmly in Maher's corner, sat in stunned silence. This was no longer a political segment. It was a mask being pulled off in real time. "Do you deny saying those things?" Leavitt pressed. Maher hesitated. "We need to take a break," he said finally, looking straight into the camera. But before the director could cut away, Leavitt leaned in. "Your audience deserves your answer first," she said. "Do you deny coordinating political messaging while publicly claiming to be neutral?" The screen stayed live. The silence grew heavier. And for once, Bill Maher had no clever comeback. It was the moment that would be replayed millions of times in the days to follow. Bill Maher, the sharp-tongued satirist known for his quick wit and verbal agility, sitting in frozen silence on live television. The pause lasted just 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. In live broadcast, 5 seconds of dead air is a lifetime. "I have conversations with many people," Maher finally said, voice tight, straining to regain control. "Bondi and I discussed framing certain issues, yes. That doesn't mean I've abandoned my independence." Leavitt, calm and unwavering, nodded slightly. "So you acknowledge the communications are authentic?" Maher's jaw clenched. "Some appear to be, yes. Though without reviewing everything you brought, I can't verify it all. But they're private conversations," Leavitt said, finishing his sentence for him. "Private communications that directly contradict what you've told your audience. You've claimed neutrality. You said you weren't pushing anyone's agenda. But behind closed doors, you were strategically coordinating messaging against the administration, while deliberately maintaining a public image of impartiality to retain trust." Silence. Even Maher's most loyal fans in the audience were visibly uncomfortable. The mask had slipped. "This," Leavitt continued, "is the kind of manipulation Americans are tired of. Media figures who brand themselves as truth-tellers while quietly driving political narratives behind the scenes." Maher leaned forward, visibly agitated. "Let's not pretend your administration has been a beacon of truth and transparency." "This isn't an ambush," Leavitt replied sharply. "It's accountability, the very thing you claim to stand for." She turned to the audience. "Bill built his brand on calling out hypocrisy. That's exactly what I'm doing tonight." The camera caught Maher's face, a blend of anger and dawning realization. He had expected a defensively scripted guest. Instead, he was facing a composed adversary armed with damning receipts and unshakable confidence. "Where did you get this material?" he asked again, this time with genuine concern. From citizens who believed Americans had a right to the truth, Leavitt said. People with access who were disturbed by the gap between what you say on camera and what you plan off it. She then reached into her folder and placed one final document on the table, a consulting agreement. This, she said, is perhaps the most troubling, an active consulting contract between your production company and a political action committee tied to Ms. Bondi. It outlines a six-figure deal for strategic communication services beginning 3 months ago. The audience gasped. One of Maher's producers rushed onto the stage, whispering in his ear. He nodded grimly, then turned to the camera. "We're going to take a break now," he said. But it was too late. Even as the show cut to commercial, the damage was irreversible. Phones lit up. Tweets exploded. Viewers across the country were already posting clips of what they had just seen. Backstage, Maher's team huddled in crisis mode. On stage, Leavitt remained composed, quietly arranging her papers. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't needed to. When the cameras returned, Maher had composed himself. "Welcome back to real time," he began. "Before the break, we were discussing some materials Ms. Leavitt brought with her. I want to reiterate, I stand by my independence. But yes, some of these communications could be interpreted as inconsistent with my public statements." It wasn't an admission, but it was as close as Maher had ever come. The crowd remained quiet. "What Americans want," Leavitt responded, "is honesty. Not neutrality claimed for credibility, then used as a disguise to push private agendas. At least my administration doesn't pretend we're transparent about where we stand." It was a devastating blow, and Maher had no retort. As the segment ended, he offered a closing line. "Well, this has certainly been illuminating. My team will be reviewing everything thoroughly." Leavitt nodded. "Thank you for the time, Bill. Your audience deserves a fuller answer, but I'm glad I had the chance to present the truth." And with that, one of the most explosive moments in political media ended not with yelling or theatrics, but with the quiet destruction of a brand built on credibility. Within minutes of the broadcast, the internet erupted. Hashtags like #MaherExposed and #LeavittReceipts trended globally. Clips of the confrontation flooded every platform. One viral tweet read, "Karoline Leavitt just exposed the hypocrisy he made a career criticizing. You couldn't script this better." Major news outlets broke into programming. CNN ran with Maher cornered, private dealings unveiled on air. Fox News chose Leavitt exposes Maher's neutrality claim with leaked video. Even MSNBC, typically defensive, acknowledged Leavitt challenges Maher in unexpected exchange. The now infamous quote, asterisk, "I'm playing the both sides card publicly because that's how I maintain credibility," asterisk played on loop across channels. By midnight, over 20 million viewers had seen the confrontation. YouTube comments flooded in. "I watched Maher for years. This changes everything. Doesn't matter your politics. This level of deception is what breaks public trust." Behind the scenes, HBO executives called emergency meetings. Maher's publicists declined comment. Pam Bondi's team went silent. The next morning, the fallout intensified. The New York Times headline, "Maher's mask slips. White House press secretary reveals contradictions." The Washington Post followed. "Leavitt's calm dismantling may change political media forever." Variety ran with, "Industry shock. Maher's credibility under fire after on-air exposure." That day, the White House briefing room was packed. Leavitt approached the podium, calm as ever. "I didn't go on that program to provoke a spectacle," she began. "I went to correct a false narrative. Americans deserve media figures who are honest about their beliefs, not ones who use neutrality as a mask to shape political discourse behind closed doors." When asked how she obtained the materials, she was direct. From people who still believe in truth. Multiple concerned citizens with lawful access to the communications came forward, troubled by the gap between what was said in public and what was planned in private. Each document Karoline Leavitt presented had been thoroughly vetted for authenticity before it ever reached a camera. But the implications of that explosive confrontation extended far beyond a single TV host. As the fallout spread, new questions emerged. How many other media figures, long considered neutral voices, were quietly coordinating with political operatives? Prominent commentators rushed to issue statements reaffirming their independence. Media ethics scholars suddenly found themselves in high demand, appearing on panels and news shows to explain the difference between commentary and covert collaboration. Initially, Pam Bondi refused to comment. But as the pressure mounted, her office released a terse statement. Attorney General Bondi engaged with Mr. Maher as she would with any member of the media seeking policy insight. Any suggestion of improper coordination is a mischaracterization. But one thing couldn't be dismissed: the consulting contract Leavitt had revealed on air. Days later, financial records confirmed its validity. Maher's production company had indeed received payments matching the figures Leavitt presented. 3 days after the broadcast, Maher finally addressed the public. "For years, I've taken pride in speaking truth to power and calling out hypocrisy wherever it lives. Last week, I didn't live up to those standards. While some of the materials shown on my program lacked context, I acknowledge my private communications did not always align with my public messaging. I apologize to the viewers who've trusted me to be transparent. I'm taking time to reflect on how I can better uphold the values I claim to represent." HBO soon announced that Real Time would take a temporary hiatus while Maher and the network determined next steps. Industry insiders reported that multiple advertisers had already suspended their contracts. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt's reputation soared. Once brushed aside as too young for the role of White House press secretary, she was now being hailed as strategic, composed, and formidable. Senior administration officials who once doubted her were openly praising her command and discipline. Media training firms began incorporating her exchange with Maher into their curriculum. Political communication classes assigned it as case study material: how to disarm hostile interviews using facts, preparation, and restraint. Beyond the personal consequences for Maher, the confrontation sparked a nationwide reckoning on media transparency. Lawmakers proposed new regulations requiring political commentators to disclose financial ties to political organizations. Watchdog groups demanded industry-wide standards for transparency around ideological alignments and paid partnerships. 2 weeks later, national polling showed a sharp increase in public skepticism towards self-proclaimed neutral media figures. One respondent summed up the national mood: "I'd rather hear from someone honest about their bias than someone pretending not to have one." For Leavitt, this wasn't just a win, it was a defining moment. What could have been a forgettable, routine appearance became the turning point that redefined her public image. She didn't posture. She didn't grandstand. She arrived prepared, with evidence, not emotion, and exposed what performance alone could not hide: contradiction. 6 months later, a media ethics professor at Columbia University published a paper titled The Leavitt-Maher Moment: Accountability in an Age of Performance. His thesis was clear: the significance of this incident isn't just in Maher's embarrassment. It's in the fact that a young press secretary challenged and exposed the illusion of objectivity. She didn't dismantle a brand through outrage, but through documentation. It was a rare moment of true accountability in a highly manufactured media era. In Washington, reputations can be made or destroyed in a single news cycle. But Leavitt hadn't just survived one. She had reshaped the rules of engagement. Political communicators coined a new phrase: "Don't get Leavitted," meaning, don't claim neutrality in public while coordinating behind closed doors. Someone might show up with the receipts. The story's legacy wasn't about the downfall of one media figure or the elevation of one press secretary. It was a broader reminder of what still holds power in a world saturated with narratives, verifiable truth. In an era where charm, wit, and performance dominate public discourse, it was cold, hard evidence that ultimately spoke the loudest. The contradiction between public posture and private reality had been exposed, and the country noticed. So if this story made you rethink media transparency, political honesty, or the power of young, prepared voices in shaping the national conversation, subscribe. Because as Karoline Leavitt proved that night, authenticity isn't a style. It's the currency that still matters most.